Hello everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and with the release of episode Igus, the DLC for Persona 3 Reload, I thought it was as good a time as any to bring a long-running series that I do on this channel over to Persona. Let's react to your hot takes. Now, I asked for them, nay, I demanded the hottest, spiciest takes that my community could muster for Persona. These fateful challengers are walking into the Thunderdome, trying their best to break me, but nay, we shall stand firm. Remember, I asked for these to be as hot as humanly possible, and it's all in good fun. So sit back, relax, replenish your HP and SP at the Fox if you need to, and let's get into it. We're gonna start off with @Diamio6524. 5 if I can learn how to read. The next Persona would be a lot better if it was based in college instead of high school, or even not school at all, maybe job life. Now, this has been a hot button issue for a lot of people in Persona, especially as we wait at least what feels like an eternity for Persona 6, and as we grasp onto any mote or molecule crumb of information that we can possibly glean. And I know this is a hot take for some people out there, but personally I wouldn't mind it. It's a delicate balance because the essence of Persona is balancing the social simulator elements of being a school kid alongside the dungeon-crawling goodness of a JRPG. Because I think the Persona formula is one that works, and works especially well. I don't think they would ever do a Persona game with, like, full-blown adults and, like, job life and all that. I don't think they would do that, because there is an element of, would that even be Persona anymore? But I think college could definitely be in play. And the common critique I hear against the idea that they could do a college setting is that there's this belief that there just wouldn't be enough time in the main character's life for anything interesting to happen, and my retort to that is very simple. They write the story, they can easily make it so. I know it sounds simple, but that kind of is the main takeaway that I have with all this. And having characters that are a bit more mature could introduce at least new and compelling dynamics. To me, it's something that's relatively minor in the grand scheme of things, because when it comes to Persona, I don't think the setting is any issue for me. I just want a good-ass game, you know? And if we can get a good-ass game by going to college, then I'm all in favor of it, but see, the way I normally approach this is, would I mind if it happens? No. Am I going to be upset if it doesn't happen? Not particularly. Having more mature characters could produce more mature dynamics between various party members, which could be a nice change of pace considering I'm coming off the back of all these other Persona games. And it's not like this series has shied away from the idea that only high schoolers can have Personas. I mean, Strikers, or you have the P3 characters from P4 Arena, and to my understanding, there's quite a few adult characters in the Persona 5 gacha game. I think people tend to make it a bigger deal or a bigger issue than it actually is in the grand scheme of things. Whether it's in terms of the feasibility of a Persona game set in college or whatnot. It's not like there isn't anime games or shows where the setting is in college, so it can happen. It's not like there's impossibility. It's a story, and if they want it to happen, they can make it happen. So let's move on to the next hot take by @GuiltyOregano7131, who proclaims, "I'll stand by this. Tartarus is the best dungeon in Persona, and it's not even close." To say I disagree would be an understatement because I really don't like Tartarus. Well, I'm in two minds about Tartarus, right? I like it conceptually, and I think it fits the theme of Persona 3 exceptionally well, because P3 is all about death, and Tartarus, in terms of its construction, is all about maximizing the time you spend within it, but the end of it, when you reach the top, can come on suddenly, and you don't know when it's going to end, but when it does, it's over. It's a good metaphor to death itself and life. So in that way, I think it fits P3 really well. My issue with it, and this is slightly rectified in Reload, but not entirely, is that at the end of the day, it just feels too grindy, too monotonous, too tedious, too repetitive. I have the same issue with P4 dungeons, but my bigger issue there is a side quest in that game being extremely grindy, but I prefer the aesthetic diversity I get in the P4 dungeons, and I prefer the mechanical diversity that I get in the P5 dungeons, where each of the P5 dungeons, at least, nothing too complex, and we'll probably get into this later in the video, but I look forward to seeing what each dungeon can actually bring to the table uniquely. There's a little story to tell in each of the dungeons, and no two dungeons ever really feel the same, and can have interesting scenarios that really fit the idea of being a Phantom Thief. Whereas in Reload for Tartarus, they try and shake things up a bit by having some roguelike elements, but I don't think they go far enough. So it can just feel like this massive slog to me far too often, and I don't think that's fun enough to me, or at least I don't think the themes of Tartarus overcome its pitfalls gameplay-wise for me. There's some people out there that love the super grindy stuff, I just don't see it. Okay, now we got another one that's gonna break my will to live. We have at Mr. Bakey, who says, P5T, Persona 5 Tactica, is not a bad game concept-wise or in execution. The people who hate it just didn't like the art style, and were a part of the hive mind of, there's too much Persona 5. Is it the best Persona game out there? No. Is it a shit game that shouldn't have been made? Also no. It was a nice 7.5 out of 10, and I'm tired of people hating on it. It had a nice story, and the two new characters were very well written. Gameplay was a touch slow at the start, sure, but in the Second Kingdom and beyond, it was good and engaging. I disagree largely. I played Persona 5 Tactica on stream. I do agree I like the new characters. Problem is, one, the game was wildly overpriced in my opinion. I don't mind the art style because it's very similar to the not P5, but Persona Q, but the Phantom Thieves largely felt like cardboard cutouts of themselves, and I don't think the game did a good job as, say, Persona 5 Strikers, in terms of implementing the Phantom Thieves into the story, furthering the development, or just showcasing the development they had in the base game. I don't think Tactica does a good job of that. It tries to make you care about these two new characters by juxtaposing them alongside the Phantom Thieves, and having elements of the development that those Phantom Thieves had be things that these new characters have to take to heart, but the problem is, in the back of my mind, I know these characters are going to be insignificant after the game ends. I think the game suffered from having too little enemy variety. Some of the music was quite nice, but some of the bosses in that game are just absolute slogs. They're giant sacks of health with very minimalistic mechanics, even on harder difficulties, and the biggest takeaway I had from P5T is the only target audience I can possibly see for that game is if you absolutely adore the Phantom Thieves and you just want to see them again in some capacity. You're willing to pay $60 for that, and you also like strategy games like that. If you hit all of those checkboxes, then like sure, but it just felt like they really wanted to make another P5 game, and this is what we got. Like I said, the new characters are largely fine, it's just the lackluster appearance of the Phantom Thieves just makes the game feel really disconnected from Persona. As if they wanted to make another game, but they didn't have the confidence that it could sell well enough, so they just slapped in the P5 characters and called it a GG. We have at Bastion Mark 8698 who says, I think they need to get rid of romance from the Persona games. I don't think they serve much of a purpose and are pretty superficial. Also bring back the fatigue system to some capacity. It was pretty cool having to determine when it was best to dungeon crawl depending on your condition, and taking into account party member availability as well. It adds to the immersion that party members don't revolve their entire lives to the whims of the player. It's good to say no to the player from time to time. Okay, so there's like a two-parter. When it concerns the romance system in Persona, I kind of agree, though I don't think removing it is necessarily the play. I think especially in Reload, it just felt there. For a game that goes like 100+ hours, or around 100 hours, at least it did for me, there's only a handful of scenes throughout the entire game that actually involves romance, and if you're targeting one of the later characters, well, good luck with that. It doesn't really do anything mechanically speaking, and just gets you a few alterations here and there. Maybe in the next game they could go about, instead of just removing it, because I don't think many people would prefer that, I think the better play would just to have more scenes, while also introducing romantic partners in the game earlier, so you can spend more of the game with them, if that makes sense. Now, when it concerns the fatigue system, I can see the appeal. My bigger issue with the fatigue system is I think it just breeds annoying elements instead of introducing fun and engaging management elements. I would rather swap to other party members because I want to play as them, or I think that party member or a different composition could work in this situation better, rather than the game essentially forcing me to. I think when the game tends to force you to play in any one specific style, that can just make it more annoying than anything. I would much rather the game up the difficulty or give me a difficulty option one step below Merciless but above hard mode, while also giving me like the party swap mechanic from P5. specifically Royal, and also give me the XP share, so that way I can mix and match my different party members and play with all of them. I would personally find that far more engaging and enjoyable than the game saying, hey, you can't use this party member from this point on because artificially they're tired. I don't see the fun or engagement that comes from that mechanic personally, and I get the appeal of having some party members not available all the time. I think Reload did a good job of this overall, but a problem you run into is if you go overboard, then I would start to question the characters themselves, where it's like, hey, we have this giant world-ending threat we have to contend with. What do you mean you're just a little bit too tired to go to Tartarus? Get your butt in gear, let's go. When it concerns Persona 3, the issue I run into it is that a lot of the balancing for the actual night activities you do have comes from that old style where the fatigue system was a bigger deal, so you went to Tartarus far more often. So the game gave you less activities to do at night, so you could actually complete everything in one full clear. Problem is, without the fatigue system, you can just do Tartarus in a night or two, giving you way more time to work with in the evenings, so you run out of things to do, and you end up like me, where at the end of the game, for like a solid month and a half, if not 2 months, you just have nothing to do at night. And it can really balk the pacing of the end of the game, which is one of the most important parts of it. I think the solution is just give me more nighttime activities instead of reintroducing or re-upping the emphasis of fatigue systems. We have @Ashy Flame, who says, I don't hate Teddy. He's annoying, especially after Risei's dungeon, but his moments of December made me like him a lot. The spin-offs, with the exception of Q2, made Teddy unbearable. I think Teddy is a symptom of the times he was implemented into the games, because his overall energy and the attempt of comedy that comes with Teddy feels like 2000s anime, which just hasn't aged all that well. Now, I love P4 and I love the comedy of P4, but I think Teddy's arguably one of the weaker elements of it, but I still really like the character. But I think the reasons I really like Teddy are book-ended in the game. You have the very beginning, where I think he's a very interesting and mysterious character. I love his development when he gets his persona at the Risei dungeon, and then the finale of his character arc with Nanako when she got sick, and him essentially becoming an actual person, like this commenter said in December, is really good. But yeah, I think they kind of take the dial for Teddy and turn it up to 11 when it concerns the spin-offs, which can produce a bit of a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths, though I think at the end of the day, I still like Teddy. In a game all about finding yourself and accepting you for who you are, I think the role Teddy served in that is one of the most crucial roles to have. Someone who questioned his very existence and what good he could even do and whether or not he was alive. So yeah, I'm not on the Teddy hate wagon either. I'll take Teddy over Morgana any day of the week. Now, we have a Persona 5-centric take, or series of takes here, so sit back, we can get into this. We have @HydroGamingGamer, who says, I have a few on P5. First of all, P5 dungeons are so bad, there's only like 2 good ones, Kamoshida and Maruki. There's no puzzles in said dungeons, and it just goes to point A to point B, and at least with the random generating dungeons, there's some variety. So let's take this piecemeal. Let's tackle this part first. Safe to say from early in the video, I fundamentally disagree. I think we're seeing a lot more P5 hate, especially lately, but P5 and especially Royal still hold a massive place in my heart, and I think the reason I like the P5 dungeons so much isn't necessarily because of how mechanically interesting they are, but it more so concerns the feel of being in these dungeons, which I think blows the dungeons from P4 and P3 out of the water. I like the feel of infiltrating these locations to find the treasure, to plan an escape route and all that. I like having the hideout zones, or the safe zones. I like the little scenarios you can have, like going into the paintings in the second dungeon, or trying to take out the gods in the Kaneshiro dungeon, or navigating the castle of Kamoshida's. I think what the P5 dungeons do so well is not only have interesting, albeit easy gameplay scenarios for them all, but also further the story of that character within the dungeon. With the Okumura dungeon, which is widely disliked, at least by a lot of people, I don't mind it. I think it's easily one of the weaker dungeons in P5, but even as a weaker dungeon, I think it does a great job of getting the point across about how Okumura views not only himself, but the people who work under him and his goals for the future. And I really appreciate the storytelling we get inside of these dungeons. On top of all the dungeons not just feeling like a series of corridors interconnected with one another in a random fashion, which I think gets old extremely quickly for me. It produces cool visuals, great moments, and for me is a direction that I hope they take with Persona 6. Now for the next part of the take. Next, P5 easily, in my opinion, has the worst cast out of all of the games besides one. They're only saved by strikers. I haven't played P1 or 2, so I can't comment on them, so let's talk about P3, 4, and 5. It's hard for me because I really like all three of the casts. It's one of the elements that I've always loved about Persona is how they handle their main characters. And the funny thing I tend to run into when it comes to Persona is that my favorite tends to be whichever one I'm playing now. At least when it concerns my favorite Persona cast. It's just, that's how close they all are for me. But I think a good little test that I came up with relatively recently is this. Which cast would I most want to see again in the future? Or, if we get a spin-off with all these casts interacting with one another like a Q game, who am I most excited to see? And I tend to find myself more excited for the cast of P3 and 4 than I am for 5. And I think the reason I care about them like that, we have to get into the realms of nitpicking a little bit. And that for me is just the way they tend to develop characters in P3 and 4 resonates more for me than the way they did in P5. At least comparatively. In P5, they tend to be like in chunks. You have the Ryuji story, you have the An story, then the Yusuke story, then the Makoto story, then the Haru story, you slide in the Morgana story every now and then, and afterwards you don't get too much in the way of furthering these characters, and I think we could use a few more scenes where these characters interact with one another, and I think 3 and 4, at least for Reload and Golden, strike a better balance in this way. Which is why I tend to get more excited for the cast of P3 and 4 than 5. I wouldn't say the cast of 5 is bad or anything, and there's still one of my favorite casts out there. But when we're talking about 3 game series, could easily be my top 10, 15 games of all time, to really rank them, I have to get kind of nitpicky. And then finally we have Persona 5 Strikers stories, one of the weakest stories in the entire series, with stuff they barely explain on and had to just guess on how it all worked out in the end. I think I give Strikers a little bit of leeway because it's a shorter spin-off game than, say, a base game. Because if you ask me which has the better story, Reload, Golden, Royal, or Strikers, the one I would put at last there is Strikers. But I think Strikers fulfills its role and fulfills it really well. To me, it acts as a masterful sequel to Persona 5. It does a great job of following up on these characters, even further developing them, and doing a lot of justice to certain characters who could have used a bit more time in the sun in the base game. Hello, Haru. And I think the new characters they introduce in Strikers are all so lovable and they fit like a glove in the story and with the dynamics of the group that they just work. I'm personally a big fan of Wolf. I think he's a great addition and a great character to bounce off the other members of the Phantom Thieves. He had a great story to tell, and I think it was told rather well. I'm also just a big sucker for P5 overall, so I liked having more time with them, and at least in comparison to Tactica, the Phantom Thieves felt far more integral to this plot, and had a bunch of consistently great moments there. Ryuji standing up to defend the AI girl was a highlight for me, and there was a bunch of just fun moments that I do kind of wish we had a bit more of in the base game, but we did get them in Strikers, so overall, I love Strikers. I think it fulfills its role rather excellently, and acts as a sequel to P5, and works because of that. So with that, I'll call the video there for the day. You all had so many hot takes, by the way, for Persona, it was hard to narrow them down. So leave a like on this video if you want to see another one of these, and leave a comment down below with the other hot takes for Persona. And remember, it's all for fun at the end of the day. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again!